Hey folks, how's it going? It's Juno. Do you ever wonder if it is even possible for a bird to be afraid of heights? You'd imagine evolution would have prevented such an instinctual fear from being able to occur in an animal that is defined by its ability to travel in the air, through the air, in that dimension, to evade predators and to give it a direct advantage over its prey. And isn't it interesting to think, when you look at birds in the sky, how they would be so defunct and redundant if they never utilized that ability to fly? So much of their being is defined around their flight abilities that without it, they're a pale comparison of the other species that exist. And they would very much lose much of their competitive edge. Nevertheless, there has been instances where birds have lost their ability to fly. Now, I don't speculate that that's due to an innate fear of heights becoming evident in their population. However, it would be such a great tragedy for a bird to live even 100 years and never flying. Yet humans, we think quite understandably, many of them have an innate sense of vertigo, a fear of being high and the potential of falling to your death. Now, we don't have the ability to fly as far as we know. So perhaps that's a bit more of a consequence for us because there's no alternative. Once we're in midair, we lack the ability to change direction from down to up. So maybe you could say it would be illogical for a bird to suffer a similar fear. But if you project your mind into that position and ask yourself, are there other things that we could do and are able of doing, yet there is a fear that restricts us from achieving that? Maybe it isn't flight, even though man has conjured a way for himself to go into the air. But it could be a number of things. Any. And then if you apply it to yourself, don't you think it would also be a tragedy if there was something comparable, which you never did because of fear of failure or even your demise? I can promise you, should a bird ever be afraid to try and fly and reach great heights, that would not be as relevant as its understanding that it will fall one day regardless of whether or not it flies. It could sit on a branch for that 100 years, but at some point it will fall, and that will be the end of it. And you would imagine if a human was scared of heights and their fear was one of falling and their demise, well, I can promise you already that human will demise one day. That physical being will exhaust its natural resources. And so to have a fear deny you your right to fly, as naive and romantic and nostalgic as that might sound, but it is a comparable tragedy to if a bird never took to the skies. And I think it's evident so many great nations and so many great houses over all of Western history have incorporated a bird into their standards, that they've born a bird on their emblems. The most noticeable of which today is the United States, of course, having an eagle as its representative. But many great nations, many noble families share that accolade of using the bird to relate something about themselves and their ambitions and their defiance of a fear of falling. And maybe it's that quality that gives them strength, that makes them great. It's one thing to understand a concern. It's another thing to have it imprison you. I promise you, you will all fall one day. Would you have it that you fall having never flown? I look at the modern world and I wonder if we're living in a natural way, in the way in which we have evolved thus far to be most suited. And I understand that some of the great things that man has accomplished has been to change his environment to better suit himself, or to allow things that wouldn't have been possible under a more natural arrangement. Nevertheless, there always remains the question if things are changing too fast, if the full ramifications of the changes that are being instituted are understood, and whether or not they are, in fact, in the long term, quite dangerous. I don't want to cause unnecessary concern. Nevertheless, my youth was spent a lot in clubs and music venues, working uninteresting, unimportant roles for as much money as I could get without inconveniencing myself or setting myself in such a position that I was hampered for my long-term opportunities, specifically the opportunities to have more fun. Looking back, I'm not sure that I made all the correct and right decisions. However, I would say that I think I actually avoided a lot of the bad ones, some which ostensibly, in the moment, seemed to have great short-term advantages. While at one point I certainly was concerned with the way people I knew or had known would view my development and progress, I think as I got a little bit older, I realized the flawed nature of the judgments other people make, and how it is engraved deeply in their own psychology, their perspective. I think we go forward from schooling, a time of great social pressure and abundant feedback, and we take some of the things we learn from that and we apply them to ourselves, greatly advancing into our own lives. And as we change, we may hold too tightly to the criticisms of the past, and in some ways that arrests our development. And with the advent of technology and social networking, it has become increasingly difficult to separate ourselves from our pasts. And it serves as another route for that arresting of development to maintain as you advance in age. I know many people abandon social media, and I think there's a very productive potential in that. And that's something I've chosen to do as well. Not least because I found myself occasionally looking into the past and trying to rectify for things that were no longer relevant, or judging myself too harshly based on words that had long since been forgotten by everybody else. Even checking on people to compare myself when our paths were so different. And while some element of that may have been seen as a cope, that I tell myself now that those comparisons are void and redundant. On the other hand, maybe they did serve as some reminder, some kind of measuring stick by which to apply a critical eye on my own existence. But the truth is the range of that perception was in itself too limited. What can I understand about somebody from their social media profile? The truth is very little. I'm only shown very few things. And these are only things that are mostly fabrications, manufactured to be there, or at best cherry-picked from a very slim number of potential candidates that could have made it. It doesn't tell me anything about the content of that person's character. It doesn't tell me anything about their mental state, their psychology, the things they consider, their thought processes, even their personal philosophies. None of it really is covered in that. Their behaviors, the very incarnation of their internal workings upon the world. None of it is available. I would only have a glimpse of that by truly knowing them in and of themselves. And any perception that I can garner from a cursory look at the material which they have chosen to make available tells me very little. And to trust in it would be a fallacy. It's very difficult to evaluate relative success because there are so many factors that can contribute to it, many of them not positive. I've said before in other videos that if I design to see a personal relationship advance productively for me with an individual, I can analyze their behaviors and their attitudes, and I can craft presentations and poses, demonstrations specifically for them that I know will have a very good chance of advancing their opinion of me and therefore reaping future benefits. Such a skill really isn't the preserve of those gifted with great intellect or positive character. It's a trick that really anyone can learn. It's the very basis of our ability to analyze our environment and mimic successful behaviors. It's one of the most basic skills a human being has. Just see what's working for somebody else and do it, and then begin to catalog those. Most people do it instinctually. The fact I have to think about it when I'm doing it just means I'm a bit more conscious of what the process is. I suppose it gives me a slight advantage in that conscious analysis I can dissect its components and understand the inside workings of them, whereas for most other people they just see what goes in and what comes out and they don't really understand anything under the hood. But then they don't have to. They have an innate social ability, whereas mine had to be forced into being because I was put in various situations when I was very young that required me to develop it. And if anything, I would have loved better to have a non-conscious process take over that, a more natural, a more innate process, a more organic one without so many concerns and so much conscious processing. Nevertheless, speaking about how to evaluate success, what do you look for? Many people would just look for how somebody has conformed to society's expectations, and in that conformity seen some sort of financial benefit. You walk by the houses and you imagine they would have come off of a factory assembly line. The house, the garage, the house, another garage, a row of houses, garages at the back, a road, a few trees, gardens all of the same size, plots of land. Collections of houses, a sprawl of almost identical buildings, made from all the same materials. Now, I understand the process that put those houses in that format there, what made it achievable, what made it a good incentive for somebody to build in that way, in efficiency, buying the materials in bulk, producing just one architectural type and then reproducing that structure once they understood that that's what worked. It's the lowest cost, and they can have it done in a certain way, a certain fashion, in which certain tradespeople are able to visitate on one section and then move to another, and there's a rolling process that means that the project is conducted in a certain time frame and at a certain cost with projected return on investment. The systematization of the caves with which we hide away from the elements. And you can look and see what kind of a cave somebody has and try and detect their personal success. And you can look and see the carriage with which they convey themselves. Is that another indicator? Or the possessions they place in their house, all from the same catalogues. They've all gone to the same warehouses, the same Swedish manufacturers. That with which society is deemed permissible, that becomes their identity. And from that identity, you're supposed to determine if that person is a success. What identity is it? You go to the club. You take part in the collective hypnotization through sound and light. You seek out other people, other individuals. For what? For mutual validation? Who are they to validate you? Are you acceptable? You should be asking yourself that question. The only one who it really matters to. All of our ends are coming. Will you still be seeking validation then? Or will you only be asking yourself, what have I done? The struggle now is to understand, if we are truly in a decline, do we benefit our people better by overcoming the decline as quickly as possible and allowing us to get back to some base level that we can build up from? Because if we can do that at an earlier point, that'll give us more time to develop for the next cycle. Or do we try to Byzantium it out and just stretch the length of the empire till its very last embers and have it overwritten by a foreign horde from the steppe? I think if we're going to choose the former, because it takes a lesser man to choose the former, and you should admit that you're not the great individuals that came before you. If I was a greater man, maybe I could salvage this. Maybe I could even overcome the decline that we see and somehow maneuver our people back into a side of progression and ascendancy. But if we can admit we're not those great men, and it only takes a basic man, an animal man, to bring destruction, then by accelerating it, you bring about a quicker end to that decline. And a new hope before too many things have been forgotten. When you look at the collapse at the end of the Bronze Age, you look at the collapse at the end of the Roman Empire, what is most troubling is that we store away only the most basic and vital technologies within some mimetic time capsule like an organized religion. that by being sacrosanct is excluded from the pilfering and salvaging of the other parts of development that came before. And in the current day, I'm not sure that you can even enshrine things within religiosity, because there is such ill will towards even the concept. And that's perhaps why the Bible speaks about, in Revelations in the end, that it will be even the holy people that will be attacked, which seems only maybe 20 years ago would have seemed an absurd situation. But yet now you could fully understand people could obtain a mentality that allows them to assault and attack religious people with a true faith and true belief. And many of those will be even religious people themselves, just adhering to a different religion. Part of that will be the corruption of religion itself in various forms. But some of it will be just a gloves are off. Just an absolute brutality. A no holds barred environment. Even hope would be abandoned. The hope of the future that spirituality offers. Because at the core of it, that's essentially what it is spirituality gives you some hope that there is an external that exists into the future, even when your future is exhausted. So it is all looking progressively forward. But if you tried to ask people today what they saw 100 years in the future, I think you'd struggle to get any clear vision. Whereas I think even 50 years ago you could have asked that question and had at least somebody have defined qualities they would imagine into the future 100 years. That uncertainty is dangerous in itself. While arrogance of certainty it can be equally damaging. Having a complete uncertainty, is probably more so. And so if we're to offer anything to anybody, perhaps what we can do, as lesser men than those who came before us, who maybe could fix this situation, perhaps what we can do is see it over with as quickly as possible, so that those better men can come back in our progeny. And to do that, I think we only need to offer people something that they had before. I think people have already shown that that's a true appeal. Not just because people are nostalgic, but because they feel something viscerally about the source. And I think what you can do is you can offer them a life that exemplifies those qualities that really couldn't exist in a civilized society. So simply by offering them that alternative identity, which really is part of their own, just a forgotten part, but by offering it to them and showing them how they can be of that identity, how they can encapsulate it, how they can resurrect it, and then also understanding that it's not one in which a civilized society can maintain. Merely by adopting it, they will begin the disintegration of the declining society. By adopting that identity, they will contribute to society's dismantlement. If that was our goal, and if we were to move forward with the aim of overcoming and bypassing as quickly as possible this degenerative period. The seasons operate in this fashion. We observe them every year. We know that the leaves will fall from the trees. But year by year, the greatest trees grow back. and they absorb more sunlight, and they seed further generations. And that is something hopeful. I think you can inspire every man you walk past. Go grocery shopping. See, you might just be 5'8", 5'9", average skinny guy. You might see a mountain of a man, 6'4", 200 kilos. Maybe not 200. A lot of kilos. A fair few potato sacks. I tell you now, if you had the right words, you could inspire him. Some people don't even know that they have strength. They're not even aware of it. Sometimes it takes somebody who has an eye for that kind of opportunity and doesn't want to just use it for themselves, but actually wants to use it for the good of our people. We need to act in consideration not only of what's best for right now, but also what's best for us as a species. If genetics is anything, it's a message. And as our ancestors faithfully passed on the message of our genetic code, we too have to contribute something to the future. Now, we don't all need to pass on our individual code, but something from our group should continue on. And then we will have fulfilled our purpose. And I think from that perspective, you can begin to identify how successful somebody really is.